This steak tastes like a ribeye and it looks similar to a ribeye, but it costs a quarter of the price. The one and only catch is it's a tough cut of meat. The thing is, with 3 simple steps, we can easily make this steak as tender as any other prime cut. In this video, I'll show you what these 3 steps are and how you can use them on other affordable tough cuts of meat. The best thing is you won't need any special equipment. All you'll need is a roasting tray, a rack, a frying pan, a fork, a temperature probe and some string. So introducing the ribeye's tougher cousin, the chuck steak. This is an incredible, not so well known cut of steak from the shoulder of the cow. It has tons of flavour and a good mix of fat to meat. This makes it one of the best options for an affordable steak. Depending on where you live, it might be known by any of these names. The main thing to look for when buying a chuck steak is the thickness. You want it to be at least 3 centimetres. This gives you the best chance to cook this steak however you like it, with the cooking method we'll be using in this video. This is a big steak coming in at just over a kilo, and it's easily enough to feed 4 people as part of a meal. But guess what? This giant steak only cost me. And the same weight of ribeye would have cost me. That's a huge saving. So the big question is, how do we make this thing tender? Well, it's actually really easy. For the first tenderising step, we're going to use one of the most underrated kitchen tools, the fork. We're going to use it to pierce the meat. This is known as jacquarding, and there are tools made to do this called jacquards. They come in all different shapes and sizes and look something like this. But as I promised earlier, for this recipe you don't need any special equipment. You can achieve the exact same results as a jacquard by just using a fork. It will just take you a minute longer. So pierce the meat from edge to edge, flip it over and do the same on the other side. Don't go too crazy, you're not trying to turn this steak into burger meat. Just make sure you pierce close together to break those strong muscle fibres down. This is a traditional French method that tenderises any tough cut of meat. It works really well. Now the steak is looking a little more beaten up than before, and to help it cook evenly we need to do something about the uneven thickness. I have this part here that tapers down, and this will overcook if I don't do something about it. Luckily the solution is simple, we just need to tie some string around the steak to bunch the meat together a bit more. For those of you who like the details, this is known as trussing. See how now I have a more even thickness all the way across the steak. You'll need to use 100% cotton string because this will be staying on the meat whilst it's cooking. I like to loop the string around the steak twice for luck, and once it's tight just tie a knot, and that's it. A simple step that will improve the quality of your steak. The second tenderising step is something that I do to all of my large cuts of meat. It's not only going to tenderise, it's also going to add flavour and help the steak to be juicier. We're going to do this with dry brining. It's very simple, just evenly cover the surface with salt so there's no bare patches of meat. This may seem like too much salt for some people, and of course not enough salt for others. For anyone who's scared of using this amount of salt for whatever reason, just remember this steak will feed 4 to 6 people, and we need the salt to help tenderise the meat. This even coating over the surface will not taste too salty in the end. Really, this is the minimum amount needed. I can't give you a weight for this because every steak is different and every salt is a different coarseness. The best way to measure it is visually like this. Flip it over and do the same on the other side. Make sure to cover all the edges as well. Then we're going to leave this for 12 to 24 hours to brine. If you don't have 12 hours, then you could maybe get away with less, but this technique really needs time to work its magic. This is one of the key steps to this recipe, and for you to have a tender, juicy steak on a budget. Place the steak on a wire rack with a tray or something underneath to catch any drips. Readjust your string if it's moved, cover it and place it in your fridge. The steak's been chilling in the fridge overnight. It looks pretty much the same as yesterday, but now there's a little blood on the tray and all of the salt has dissolved and worked its way into the meat. Pat the surface dry with some paper towel and leave it out on the side to lose some of that fridge chill. 30 minutes to an hour on the side will be enough, depending on how warm your kitchen is. If this freaks you out, don't worry, your steak won't spoil in an hour on the side. If you do less time and cook the steak from cold, you will get an uneven cook. Whilst waiting for this to happen, preheat your oven to 120°C, 250°F, and this brings me on to step number 3 to tenderise this giant steak, and the great thing is it works with any thick piece of meat. It's known as reverse searing, and it's a simple way of cooking meat that pretty much guarantees perfect results every time. And it works particularly well for steaks and other meats that you want to serve rare, or medium. We're going to roast this steak on a wire rack over a tray for anywhere between 45 minutes to 1.5 hours. The wire rack is crucial because it helps the steak to cook evenly. It stops one side touching the hot tray and overcooking. The timing is going to be individual for each and every piece of meat, so the best way to guarantee success is to check the internal temperature of the steak after the first 30 minutes. At this point your steak will not be ready, but it will give you an idea on how quick the steak is cooking, so you can make better judgments on timings from here. Mine is at around 30 Celsius, so it's risen between 15 and 20 degrees in 30 minutes. I'm going to check it again in 20 minutes and that should be about right. What's so great about this low and slow method of cooking, especially for steaks, is that the window for rare, medium and medium is so much larger than if you were cooking in a frying pan. In a pan you have around a 30-second window before the steak is overcooked, but cooking in the oven like this you have more like 5, maybe even 10 minutes before the steak passes your desired doneness. It's definitely one of the most stress-free ways of cooking a steak. After an hour and 5 minutes, mine is done. I'm pulling it at 52°C, 125°F. This temperature will continue to rise to the mid to late 50s during the next step, giving me a perfect medium rare to medium steak when I come to serve it. Now preheat a frying pan or a skillet over a high heat for a few minutes. Once the pan is ripping hot, add a little neutral tasting high smoke point oil, basically not extra virgin olive oil. Once oil is shimmering like this, lay in your steak. Press it into the pan a little to get as much meat touching the surface of the pan as possible. Give it 30 seconds or so and rotate it 90 degrees. Another light press with a spatula, let another 30 seconds pass, flip it over and do the same steps on the other side. I like to do this with every steak that I cook, essentially move it every 30 seconds. This cooking method gives the most even crust. Because we've done most of the cooking in the oven, the steak's lost a lot of its surface moisture, so this last step in the frying pan only takes 3 or 4 minutes. And it produces a lot less smoke compared to cooking the steak in the traditional way, just in the pan. This makes it a great option for dinner parties, because you can spend less time in the kitchen and there's less chance of setting all your smoke alarms off. If you're unsure about timing all of this, then I've made a guide on my website that shows you how to plan and time this recipe. There's a link in the description below. Most steak recipes will be basting with butter at this point to get a good crust. I'm keeping it simple with this recipe and showing you that you don't have to do this to get an incredible crust. But if you do want to baste and add things like garlic and herbs, then you can do it at this point for the last minute or so of cooking in the pan. After almost 4 minutes of frying with regular flipping and turning, this steak is done. It's got a great crust and I didn't set any of my smoke alarms off. It's reading just over 57°C, 135°F in the centre. Now just leave it to rest for around 10 minutes to finish cooking. It's time to see how this steak looks. Take off the string, and if you remember back to how it looked earlier, we had these 3 different bits of meat connected together. To have the most tender mouthfuls, it's a good idea to slice these sections individually, so we can easily slice out any tough patches of fat and gristle. Just run your knife in between those sections, they will come apart very easily, and remove any bits you don't like the look of. Then you can slice each piece individually. It's much easier this way than trying to tackle the whole hunk of steak. With that leftover fond in the frying pan, it would be foolish not to make a quick pan sauce. But sometimes pan sauces can be confusing because of all the different ways they can be made. So I made this video here sharing one method that you can use to make any pan sauce. This is what I got taught as a young trainee cook. Look at how tender and perfectly cooked this steak is. It's got such an even cook from edge to edge because of the low temperature cooking method. This is meant to be a tough cut of meat, but with these few simple steps and some time, it's just as tender as a ribeye.